All right, everyone, it's time to talk about the far left, specifically the Bernie babies, because I was thinking to myself, one of the things that was promised by a couple of this was something that Project Veritas and James O'Keefe exposed months ago. One of the things that was claimed by some of the staffers then, in their hidden video footage, their camera footage there, was that they had a couple of mid-level staffers. Now, initially they tried to claim that this was like an unpaid volunteer, like part-time for the campaign. It was actually individuals that are paid reasonable amounts. They're mid-level organizers. They claimed that if Bernie Sanders didn't become the nominee, if it was Biden or Warren or whoever, that they were going to burn Milwaukee to the ground. And that's, of course, where the Democratic convention was planned. It's not clear that there's going to actually be a convention. Biden's already clinched. He's still largely doing, I think, the digital-only thing, which doesn't really work because nobody watches his boring-ass live streams unless it's to laugh at all of the mistakes he makes. So the Bernie fans, naturally, the more fervent ones, the ones with ties to communist organizations specifically, we're not talking about the average Bernie hippie in a college or something. They've basically fulfilled their promise. They can't burn Milwaukee because there's no convention to be had there, but they burned a lot of Minneapolis down, and St. Paul, Atlanta, New York City, LA, a million other, Louisville, DC, certainly. Well, they did exactly what some of these people stated was their organizational intent. Their intent was in an organized fashion, as groups, not necessarily fully centralized, and this is Antifa's gaslighting people a lot right now. I'll talk about that in brief as well. Because they are an organization. They're just a loose organization doesn't have one central linchpin. They've got funding, they've got organization, they've got insignia. It's not an idea, it's a movement. That's some real gaslighting. It's funny how the same people who are applauding this particular group then claim it's not a group. Oh yeah, just put on black clothes and hurl rocks. Oh, you're Antifa now. And so, okay, well, kind of, sort of, you're a thug. These people, these people embedded in the Bernie Sanders campaign who want socialism or communism or whatever, and of course socialism is basically communism with training wheels. They said they were going to burn shit. They said that they were going to loot. I find it slightly beyond coincidence that it happened to be around the time that Joe Biden more or less clinched the nomination. With the last wave of races, it became insurmountable for Sanders. Even if Biden systemically collapsed by 50 points, he still would have become nominee because he still, in a proportional delegate allocation situation, would have gotten over the number, 1991 or something like that. He still would have won. And then all of a sudden, because one dude gets killed by the police, which is a fairly regular fucking occurrence, by the way, people, this couldn't be astroturfed and planned out at all of a sudden, riots explode all over the U.S. I wonder who caused this to happen. Oh no, it was just organic. It was just IRA police boiled over and people were pissed about lockdowns, so they started throwing punches and then Molotovs. Now, there was a little bit of organization behind it. That's why they found a bunch of gas-filled bottles lying all over the place in Minneapolis. That's why this broke out in multiple cities at the same time. They told you that they intended to do this if Biden was the nominee. This isn't even anger at Trump. This is anger among socialists who wanted Bernie Sanders to be the Democratic candidate. That's what causes these riots. These riots are being created, fomented in the more central sense by organizations, usually in urban areas. It doesn't really happen in small-town America. You may have noticed this. It's being organized by small groups of people, the 1% of Bernie's fans who are really fanatic. Now, keep this in mind. It's only a tiny proportion of people that back Sanders, and they see him as a milquetoast, oh, he's not even quite a socialist, but, we'll deal with him sort of candidate. The thing is, let's say only 1% of his fans are involved with communism, anarcho-fascism, whatever the fuck they call themselves now. That's still a lot of people. That's tens of thousands of people. And because of the demographics of the Sanders campaign being primarily urban in nature, I know he had a lot more support than Biden out in hayseed land. That's why most of the states he won were overwhelmingly rural. But by and large, the more fanatic clump of his fans, they're not in Farmville. No, they're in New York City or LA. Why do you think that's where the riots broke out? These people, all you need is a dozen people to start a riot. If you've already got, you've got a lockdown, number one. You've got a recent police killing that is fanning the flames of people's racial animus. You simply have a dozen people there, And when there's a group of people that are obviously already agitated, you agitate more. That's what Antifa does. It's literally part of their manifest. The whole idea of these groups, and it's not just Antifa that does this, BLM is certainly involved with a variant of this. The whole idea is perpetual antagonism. If you want to try to destroy the system, which is what they state that they want to do, you simply create antagonism and ire whenever possible. It doesn't matter what people are protesting, you show up and you try to make it violent. It doesn't matter why people are socially alienated. You try to redirect their anger at a certain thing, or you just try to destabilize things altogether. It's like they're trying to defund the police now. If that happens, right-wing militias will be your police. I hope that people do understand that. This could be, by the way, the left's actual goal, to try to get the much more well-armed, much more potentially well-organized survivalistic segment of the far right to actually fire a shot. Thankfully, they tend to be very lawful, so that's never at any given moment likely to happen. Remember the Bundy Ranch standoff? The one that the Bundy family legally won years later? Everyone was telling me that there were violent, evil terrorists that were seeking to overthrow the U.S. government at the time. Interesting how that never happened. Interesting how the people initially accused, except for the ones that broke into that federal building months later, interesting how none of them are in jail right now. I think they did a civil suit and won, actually. Wasn't there a settlement? Interesting how all those Gadsden flag wavers that show up at the capital of Michigan never fired a shot either, but you have plenty of shots being fired by these hooligan left-wingers. And keep this in mind. There are two aspects of this. The first is the central organization, the 1% of the people in those crowds that are actually attempting to openly antagonize violence for various political or social reasons, or just to allow looting. They want to rip the community apart because they don't like the political situation. They hate the United States. If they can inflict incremental damage, you can cause $1 billion worth of damage to a city fairly easily if you have a few thousand people rioting for a couple nights. Billions and billions in damage done. Tens of thousands of jobs and thousands of business fronts damaged or destroyed already by these rioting, looting hordes. 99% of them, of course, are just there either to be violent, just to go wild for a while. Lockdowns aren't helping, by the way, blue state governors. Or they want to loot. But they didn't start doing that on their own. Somebody else was throwing the bricks. And they told you they were going to do that. They literally admitted to it on tape to Project Veritas when they were embedded with people in the Sanders campaign. They showed this. Go back through the fucking videos. You've got, I think, 2 or 3 different instances from months ago where they got these people on tape saying that if Bernie was not the nominee, they would cause violence. So who the fuck do you think has organized this violence? Do you think that a handful of black people on the corner just decided to start looting for no reason? No. Somebody caused that to happen. It wasn't even over police brutality. That's just the excuse. That's sort of like the cover story. You wait until people are antagonized already, and then you try to tip them over the edge. That's Antifa's goal. That's the goal of some of the freaks in BLM. That's the goal of other communist and similar organizations. They're pissed because they didn't get their way politically, so they're trying to make lemons into lemonade by destabilizing the political situation. And by the way, by and large, in most of these places, the looting and shooting stuff is now on a low simmer. If you end the lockdowns, I think a lot of people's problems would go away because, when people have something to do other than crime, they tend to prefer doing the other thing. Most of the time, as far as the opportunistic, just running wild teen/20-something looters go, they're pacified by the bread and circus of society. They've got, the smartphones and shit. But if they can swipe one because Antifa's already smashed in the storefront and lit it on fire, yeah, some people will do that. And the lockdowns, crack down on the rioters, let the protests do what protests of this kind always inevitably do, which is kill themselves off. You get too much, like when you see this group of people, I think it's North Carolina, this group of white liberals sobbing and washing the feet of black people, begging for forgiveness. It's like, dude, I hate to say this to the right-wingers, but this is like typical cringy college kid virtue signaling middle-class/upper middle-class gated community liberal behavior. This is not a new thing. This is not a paradigm shift within U.S. politics either. Hell, if anything, this sort of kind of protest was way more prevalent 10 years ago. Now it's generally seen to be cringy and people make memes about it online and it kind of discourages that behavior a little bit. Except on the echo chambers of Twitter and Tumblr. You hang out on Twitter, and if you're not on the left and you hang out on Twitter, you get demoralized. You should either delete your Twitter account or realize that the very small subsection of the U.S. public that you're seeing there is heavily, heavily slanted to the left. They kicked a lot of the more intelligent non-leftists off anyway, and their audiences followed them to other platforms. So it's probably like a 75-25 proposition there in favor of a combination of socialists and neoliberals. Yeah, the fact that you see a lot of Karl Marx quotes on Twitter does not speak to a larger political paradigm. By the way, Trump's approval stabilizing already. It's above 43 already. It's already stabilized. I was correct again. That's about all. Peace out.